Hello, everyone. This is Incite and Excite, here to have a short literary talk about feminism in the 2019 movie Dark Phoenix. It's no secret, this movie is one of the few that uses this topic to make a statement about our modern era. And in this movie, feminism is the priority in regards to the usual civil rights metaphors. Something that really hasn't been discussed in these superhero movies unless it's a female lead. And so far, only one of them has gotten any real heat about it. But I wonder if people will say Dark Phoenix went too far on the feminazi craze. And yes, I do use the term feminazi because the public uses it. And the public also uses toxic masculinity, so I will also use that term when necessary. Just to get things out of the way, on the scale of 1 to 10, this movie is like a 6 in the feminism scale. I say that because this movie can be interpreted in the basic wants of the individual versus what society expects of the individual, and that basic dynamic. The movie also cuts away from the primary storyline to get the secondary storyline action, which is just two males trying to control the situation. And the movie pushes martyrdom and its positive effects on everyone instead of addressing the effects of the new era within the group that pushed it. Leave a comment if you disagree or if you would like an elaboration of what I just said. Anyways, let's talk about the movie in general. First, let's see if it's even fair to say this movie has feminist connotations, disregarding what the director had already said. Let's just look at the movie and ignore outside influences. Within the first 10 minutes-ish, you get Mystique to suggest, very bluntly, that X-Men should be called X-Women, because they do most of the saving. That suggestion pretty much points at what the movie will be addressing, because it just stands out, right? And remember the typical racial implications and LGBTQ plus talking points? Those issues are now pushed aside, which is fine. Not every movie needs to be 100% representative of all groups. Doing so would just be exhausting. But what else points to feminist talking points? Well, that comes from Professor Xavier and how well he has adjusted to the new era, where he and his group, the mutants, are now welcomed, but maybe missing the subtleties because he only focused on the overall quality and not, let's say, how women are represented and actually try to establish equality. Because, as mentioned several times in the movie, they are always one bad day away from erasing all their work. And take notice that he, the individual, is in charge. He has a direct line to the president. He is the one going to to the parties and conferences, and he doesn't look like he hates all that attention. Now that we can fairly address feminism in the context of the film, because it is self-evident and supported in the first act, we can see how far the writing went and what argument they are presenting to us. So remember, a theme can be established from the problem presented in the first act, and the argument to support the theme is represented by how the problem is resolved. The problem or central issue, unlike the other movies, is solely represented by one character, and that character is Jean Grey, and she serves as an allegory in which we must connect with. To understand Jean, you have to know her past, and if you have watched the movie, and by the way, go watch the movie, she killed her mom and pushed her father away after a car accident. The father felt, he could not take care of her, that she was a lost cause, and maybe it would be best if she was just gone. To be fair, she did kill his wife, so don't hate the father too much. Fortunately, Professor X came to help her, to support her, and to teach her broken things can be fixed, and that she herself is not broken. And that is the philosophy Jean has been taught to believe until the accident, because, of course she forgot. So Jean has grown in a stable environment, with the sole exception of that Professor X might have done a no-no, and we'll get into that in a bit. Now that we know her past, we can address the present. Professor X pushes the crew to save everyone when they're tasked to save the astronauts in the spaceship. Even when they are put in danger, Professor X, I guess, is more focused on achieving, I guess, the public perception of heroism, right? Because they have to be always on the good side, on the, in their eyes. And of course, this results in the inciting incident. After her accident in the spaceship, she absorbs what was thought to be a solar flare, but in reality, a power of creation and destruction. And before we get into that metaphor, let's move on to something else first. We are introduced to Smith, played by Jessica Chastain. Again, we will ignore background influence because she has made a lot of noise to push for progressive issues in Hollywood. And in the movie, her job is to take back the power so her alien race can use it, or at least influence Jean to side with her. So now the real struggle begins. We have two sides that Jean has to either choose from or reconcile. Professor Xavier is, I guess you could say, he will represent, or at least he fights for the humanist goal. And on the other side, it's Smith's manipulation in disguise of removal of undue male authority, which some will call feminazis. And this is where the movie proves that it's not that kind of feminist movie. The kind some people hate just because they go a little too far in their representation of men. So let's examine the sides. First, the good side. These are the ones we're, I guess, supposed to be more lenient with, right? So Professor Xavier represents all humanity. Or we can go with all lives matter. Funny that a mutant now represents all of humanity. He fought for the acceptance of mutants. He fought for for peace for the mutants. He fought for having a fan base for the mutants because they are now superheroes, even though he doesn't know what that means. Clearly, we are meant to like him. He is the X in X-Men after all. But this movie isn't scared to show the realities and the shortfalls of his methods, and how he fails to even acknowledge his own mistakes, which maybe is something the audience should look into. What does that remind you of? I'll give you a hint. Toxic masculinity. Now, the bad side. Smith is just the evil alien who is trying to take over the world. To restart her civilization, it's the basic evil alien trope. But what's interesting is she uses some ideas that might resonate with Jean. Clearly, Jean is special. She was able to absorb the energy without blowing up. But since this movie is just a metaphor, Smith represents the extremist view of feminism, aka feminazis. We can agree Smith is evil. There's no defense for her, narratively that is. But she brings up points that might seem like obvious instances of male domination, like how Professor Xavier manipulated Jean in that, he lied to her about her father, about her past, erased and altered her memory, and how she is just a component of his will, which is all true. Now, did this movie tackle this issue in the best way? No. They are sidetracked by the need to have Magneto and Professor Xavier fight each other. Because you can't have a movie if they are not at ends with each other. And Jean, even though it's about her, is lost behind these men. Don't take me seriously, guys. It's just an interpretation. But like I said in my review, this movie fails in the sense that who was supposed to be the audience avatar? Who was the audience supposed to identify with? Because if it was Jean, you kind of did a bad job, right? Because where I don't ever remember identifying with her unless you would say oh, I feel sorry because she's being manipulated with. But during these type of movies, I would expect Scott, Cyclops, to be more of a significant character, and he plays like a side character in this, where he has no control of this movie or the plot. I mean, and I understand why, because they're trying to have Jean and the other characters be more prominent, except they went out of their way to make Professor X and Magneto more prominent in this movie. But I think Scott would have been a better bet to focus on. But my opinion is that the entire movie spreads itself on the audience, hoping you would attach yourself to Professor X, Magneto, Cyclops, maybe Storm, but that's all besides the point. But this movie does do a good job on addressing the problem with Professor X, because we do see his good intentions, right? But his good intentions had consequences. You know, he was never out to control Jean, but guide her. And Jean recognizes that with her little flashback. And so begins her reconciling her wants and needs, where Professor Xavier represents order and Smith represent absolute freedom. It's your basic id versus superego dynamic. Where the movie lacks, in my opinion, is that Jean is not brought back to confirm and show the effects of finding truth behind both ends. Showcase true feminism, the result of feminism. But the movie moves on in her place. You know, the school's named after her. Xavier is now replaced with Beast. Basically, a new generation is now in charge. No longer stuck in the past where there is more stringent ideas. My final thoughts is that the feminist message was not as impactful as it could have been. Feminazis are obviously bad, and let me make it clear. Just because you're a feminist doesn't automatically make you a feminazi. Of course, Smith was not going to win, but you would not expect a movie to end in such a way where there's no real resolution with a take-home message. It's just the passing of time that is presented, which misses out on the actual opportunities to highlight and comment on changes in society. I mean, what are they trying to say if Jean represents the feminist struggle and just transcends while everyone just moves up one notch on their career path? All right, that's basically all I had to say about this topic. Thanks for watching, guys and gals. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment. And get ready to see a video about, can you be conservative and still like anime? All right, later, guys. Thanks.